Okay, so here we are, episode 50. This being the week of Thanksgiving, when this podcast is going to be uploaded, it'll be week of Thanksgiving. It is the 50th episode. So can I just take a moment and say thank you so much, everybody who is listening to this podcast, who has been listening. I've been really encouraged to hear from people just really from all different people that I know from all different avenues and aspects of my life that have listened to one or more episodes, and that really means a lot because I know there's plenty of podcasts out there. There's plenty of things that you could be doing with your time and lots of information out there. And what I hope this podcast does is, as I've stated many times before, give you helpful, practical financial advice from a Christian worldview. And I hope to put out many more episodes on a lot more topics. I got a lot of things kind of on the back burner, some things that I've been mulling around, topics that I want to do a full episode on. Even some of the questions that came in for this episode were things that I want to flesh out in a greater way and make it a whole episode in and of itself. So thank you if you have sent in questions either to this episode or previous episodes. And of course, I really appreciate you tuning in and listening. So I've identified 7 topics, 7 questions that came in either through social media or from personal conversations that I've had here recently. Topics that I think would be very timely, very helpful, and have a broad application. And ones that, honestly, I'm kind of excited to answer. So let's go ahead and kick it off by talking about taxes and retirement. This comes courtesy of my Uncle Rick. So if Uncle Rick happens to be listening to this episode, shout out to him. I won't mention everybody's names that sent in a request or a question via social media, but I'll shout out my Uncle Rick. So he asked about minimizing taxes in retirement, which of course is a really important concern for so many people. I even said jokingly on the comment there on Facebook, I said, you have to pay your taxes, but there is no law that says you have to leave the IRS a tip. And so, of course, we want to make sure that we're paying the taxes we're supposed to be paying, but we don't want to be paying taxes unnecessarily. So let's talk through a few ideas, a few ways that we can minimize taxes in retirement. One of the best ways, and one that I'm sure many people are familiar with, at least in name, is Roth accounts, whether that's a Roth IRA or Roth 401k. Roth accounts allow you to put money away that you've already paid taxes on and allows you to invest and grow that money so that when you take it out later on in retirement, it all comes out tax-free. A little bit of the problem with that is not everybody has access to Roth accounts, or at least the Roth account limitations for the IRA are not huge. But leading up to retirement, that can be huge. To have a huge bucket of money, to have a nest egg of tax-free money that you can pull from in retirement can be a huge, huge advantage. So for those that are in lower tax brackets now, it's a great idea in all the opportunities that you can to invest into Roth accounts, whether it's a Roth IRA or maybe you have a 401k or similar type of retirement plan through work that you can make Roth contributions to. They say, well, Nate, I don't have that availability, or I'm above the income limits for that. Well, it doesn't mean you're necessarily out of luck, because there are the opportunity to do Roth conversions from traditional accounts. So if you have your money in, say, a traditional IRA, the IRS, at least as of now, things may change in the future, but as of now, you're able to do a Roth conversion. And basically what you're going to do is take a portion of the money that's in your traditional IRA and say, I'm going to elect to pay taxes on it now, and put that money into a Roth IRA account. Because really what you're doing is you're deciding, I'm going to pay taxes now as opposed to later, because if you wait and take money out of the traditional IRA in retirement, then you would owe taxes at whatever your income tax rate is. So it's kind of a pay the devil that you know today instead of what may be down the road. And of course, we don't know what tax rates will be in the future. But if you're like me, I tend to think that they're probably not going to be lower than they are today. So this can be a great way to incrementally set money aside that's going to be tax-free later on. A great strategy is what some people call filling up your tax bracket. So for instance, let's say you're in the 12% tax bracket, and when you calculate your income for the year, you're about $10,000 short of the limit to put you up into the 22% tax bracket for income. What you may want to do in that situation, and of course, by the way, a huge caveat, huge disclaimer, this is always something you want to get tax advice from a qualified tax professional. But just to explain the strategy, what you can do is take $10,000 that are still at 12% and still in the 12% tax bracket and convert part of your IRA to a Roth IRA. So pay 12% on it now so that later on you're paying 0% when you take it out. Because there's a good chance that when you take it out of your traditional IRA later on, you will not be taxed at 12%. It'll probably be higher at that point. So that's one way, and that's a huge way. A couple other ideas. Health savings accounts are great. You can, as long as you have a high deductible health insurance plan, you can put money in a health savings account. It's around $3,600 a year for an individual, and I think $7,200 for a couple. And this allows you to set money aside in a tax deductible account. So you get a tax deduction for it now, but then later on in retirement, let's say you have health expenses that you need to pay, you can pay for them out of that account, and you don't have to pay any taxes on those distributions. Now, in retirement, one of the biggest things, and this is something that a lot of people overlook or they're just not really aware of as far as how to minimize taxes in retirement, is the location of your assets. So you have investments, you have accounts that are specifically for retirement. Maybe it's a 401k, maybe it's a Roth IRA, maybe it's just a regular investment account that's not an IRA, not a special retirement account, it's just a regular brokerage account, a taxable account. Sometimes what you have and where you have those investments can make a big difference tax-wise. So for instance, just to give an example here, let's say somebody's investing in stocks and they have several growth type funds, and they're trying to decide what's the best account to hold these investments in. Is it my 401k? Is it my Roth IRA? Is it a taxable account? Especially for people that are already in a high tax bracket, it may make more sense for you to hold things like stocks and growth funds in a taxable account, because when you down the road sell those funds and liquidate it and pull from those accounts to fund your spending in retirement, in a taxable account, you're going to have to pay capital gains on those. So you maybe bought the fund at $100 a share. Later on down the road, many years later, you sell them at $300 a share. So there's a $200 capital gain. Well, capital gains rates are much lower than the higher ends of the income tax brackets. So if you're in the 24, 32, 35% tax bracket range for income, you would rather have capital gains because they're going to be in the 15%, 20% at the highest. So that's another idea, another strategy that can be used to save taxes in retirement. Another thing that you want to look at is be careful about how much you're pulling from traditional IRAs and from 401k accounts that you're going to get taxed on as you pull from them. Here's a classic mistake, and sometimes people don't really think of this. They get to retirement, they've saved up all this money in their retirement accounts, and now it's time to spend, and maybe they have a big purchase. Maybe they're going to pull out a bunch of money and pay off their house. Maybe they're going to buy an RV. Maybe they're going to take a big trip that they've been wanting to do. And when they pull out $30 or $50 or $100,000 out of their account, that counts as taxable income. And so if you have a huge spike one year and a huge withdrawal, that can push you up into higher tax brackets and leave you with a much higher tax bill than you were anticipating. So be careful about that. Now that works on the flip side too, because sometimes it makes more sense to be pulling more out of your traditional IRAs in certain years when you're going to be in a lower income year. So for instance, maybe you retired at 65 and your spouse is taking Social Security, but you're going to wait until you're 67. So you've got only one source of income coming in for 2 years, and you're going to fund the rest with money out of your traditional IRA. And perhaps because you have a lower income, you're only going to be paying 12% income tax on those withdrawals, which is good. Those would be smart times to maximize withdrawals. Whereas later on, years where you're going to pull out a lot of money, that would be better to pull from Roth accounts or maybe from other taxable accounts to lower your tax bill. Another thing, another aside, if you have a significant amount of money in taxable accounts. Tax loss harvesting is another important thing that you want to make sure at the end of the year that you try to offset gains with losses and minimize a tax bill. And that's, again, something that's good to talk over with a tax professional, talk over with a financial planner. So these are all ideas. Everybody's situation is different, but hopefully one or two of those resonate and are things that you can be thinking about. Maybe it will help you in your situation. I did have a question, just a quick aside on pastoral finances, and I did want to tackle that in today's episode, but then I realized I would rather do a whole episode dedicated to that. There are some unique challenges for pastors. Many of them don't have traditional benefits, your retirement, healthcare, disability package that a lot of corporate type jobs provide. Some pastors have opted out of Social Security, so that really makes a big difference in planning for retirement. Other challenges that pastors face, they have to pay FICA taxes. They have to pay both the employee and employer. If you're a W-2 employee, if you just get a regular paycheck from a company, you're paying 7.65% to Social Security and to Medicare, and then your employer is matching that amount. But if you're a pastor, you're considered self-employed, and you have to pay both sides of that. So you're paying over 15% in FICA taxes. And the other challenge is that what I found is a lot of times pastors are underpaid compared to the median income in their area. Not always, but I would say that's probably more common. And so a lot of times pastors are trying to budget and make do on a salary that's tight. Let's put it that way. Now, there are some unique benefits about pastors' finances. They get housing allowance, which is a huge benefit. Sometimes they get free housing in the form of a parsonage. So there are things that are pros, but that's something I think we want to go into greater detail in its own episode. So I appreciate that question, and we'll tackle that here soon. Next one, best ways to defer taxes on your income. This would be for a W-2 employee. So not self-employed, just somebody who's getting a paycheck from a company, they're the employee. What are the best ways to really minimize the taxes when you're getting paid that way? So let's go through a few of the most common ways and just kind of hit on some things, just make sure that you know. And by the way, this is really timely because we're coming to the end of the year. Probably many of you that are listening to this are in open enrollment season for your workplace, so it's time for you to review your benefits and make your elections for next year. So if you still have a window of time to do that, I hope you'll make sure that you go through, look at all your options, understand what they are. If you don't, talk to your HR department to make sure you're fully maximizing the benefits that are available to you. Probably the easiest, the most common one is your 401k or whatever retirement plan is offered through your workplace. Typically, whatever you put into it is pre-tax, meaning any contributions you make to the retirement plan is not going to count towards your taxable income for this year. You'll pay taxes on it later. Now, as I said before, some retirement plans offer Roth contributions. So if that's the case, then you're saying, I'll pay taxes on it now so I don't have to pay taxes on it later. But that can be a huge way, especially if you've got a lot of margin in your income and you can really afford to put a lot away. 401ks offer pretty high limits as far as how much you can contribute a year, $19,500 regularly or up to $26,000 now for those that are 50 or older. HSAs, health savings accounts, as was mentioned earlier, another great option. Not all workplaces offer them, but if they do, man, if you anticipate having health costs in the future, which, I mean, let's face it, pretty much all of us do, and you have the ability to save extra, that's another way to really reduce your tax bill, especially towards the end of the year. You can make a couple bigger contributions into your HSA if your HR allows you to change it from week to week or month to month as far as how much gets deferred from your paycheck. You can kind of try to top that off. Again, just over $7,000 for a family, just over $3,500 for an individual that you can put away in an account like that. There's something else called a flexible spending account. These are a little bit tricky. These are great for, let's say, you have childcare expenses throughout the year. Your kids are in daycare for the week or part of the week, or if that's the case, you can, and if your employer offers a flexible spending account, what you can do is set money aside from your paycheck into this account, and then from that account, pay your qualified childcare expenses. And by doing so, the money that's coming through the flexible spending account doesn't count towards your taxable income. Got to be really careful with using this though, because it's a use it or lose it type of account. So you only want to put money in if you know you're going to have expenses for the year. If you put $1,000 away and then don't end up using it, it doesn't carry over to the next year. So be careful with that. Another thing, when it comes tax time, when you're filing your taxes, some people, you want to look at itemized deductions. So here's how this works, just in a nutshell. You add up all your different sources of income, and then you're allowed to take certain deductions. Most people take a standard deduction, which for a single person is $12,550 for this year. For a married couple filing jointly, it's $25,100. What that means is that amount of your total income you can deduct. You don't have to pay income taxes on that amount. The alternative would be to itemize deduction. So everybody gets that baseline. If you're single, married, filing jointly, that's your deduction automatically. Or you can choose to itemize and say, I actually have deductions that I can add up that will total more than that amount. And if that's the case, then you get an even bigger deduction. So these would be things like interest paid on your mortgage or charitable giving. The problem is that there's not a lot of itemized deductions that are out there anymore. They kind of limited the scope of those a few years ago. So if you made sizable charitable contributions, if you pay a lot for mortgage interest, these types of things, it's worth looking into whether you should itemize. Again, that's something you want to talk over with your tax preparer and make sure that you're not skipping over that step and just taking the standard deduction if itemized works out better. Now, this is, I thought, should I include this or shouldn't I? But I'm going to. Best ways to defer taxes on your W-2 income, maybe having kids, honestly. The child tax credit has been bumped up quite a bit recently. It used to be $1,000 per child. And by the way, a credit, when you file your taxes, a credit is a dollar for dollar match of your tax liability. So if at the end of the year you owed $1,000 in taxes and you had a $1,000 credit, those would cancel. So it used to be $1,000 per child, then it went up to $2,000, and then this last year it's gone up to $3,000, and then for any children that are under 6, it's $3,600. And it's fully refundable, meaning if at the end of the year you were set to owe $5,000 in taxes, but you had 3 children that were 6 and older, $3,000 each, so you have a $9,000 credit. So that cancels your $5,000 tax bill, and you have $4,000 left over. You still get that money. So even though you don't even owe any taxes, you still get the $4,000 tax credit. So that's been a huge change for a lot of people from last year, and looks like there's a good chance that those numbers will stay in place at least for next year. $3,000 per child, $3,600 for under 6. Well, that remains to be seen, I guess. But that can do a lot to kind of negate some of the tax bill for the year. Now, if you're self-employed, that's a whole nother can of worms. That opens up a lot more deductions that we really don't have time to address in this episode. Okay, next question. What are the biggest retirement mistakes that you've seen? This could be very wide and very varied, but the 3 that immediately came to mind, things that I think are common mistakes that people make in retirement. Number 1 is taking Social Security at the wrong time. Basically, you're able to take Social Security as early as 62 and as late as 70. The longer you wait, the more you will be paid. The problem, of course, is nobody knows how long you're going to live, right? So if you say, I'm going to wait till I'm 70, and you pass away when you're 65, well, you never get any money from Social Security, even though you've been paying into it your entire life. So the break-even point is right around 80, 81 years old, so that by the time you turn 80, 81, if you wait longer and wait till 70, you will have gotten just as much money as if you had taken it at 62, because by getting bigger monthly payments, you're able to catch up quicker, and then beyond that, then it's a net gain for you. Now, it really comes down to your needs and your cash flow in retirement, and a lot of times people either take it too early because they're worried. They think, oh man, better take it now and get something rather than nothing. Or perhaps they leave too long of a gap when they didn't need to and wait till 70, but now they're spending down their entire life savings just to get to 70 and they're left with nothing there. So there's a right answer for each person. There's not a rule of thumb that says you got to take it at 62 or full retirement age at 67 or 70. But you definitely want to make sure you understand the trade-offs, and that's why, again, talking to a financial planner and going through those steps and planning it out is really important. Another big retirement mistake is not properly planning for healthcare expenses. What's going to happen in retirement for most people is, maybe when you're first retired, there might be a little bit of an uptick in your living expenses. At least it's going to stay the same for almost everybody. But, people think, man, I'm retired now. I'm going to go take a trip. I'm going to visit the grandkids. I'm going to, go out to eat a little bit more, get out on the golf course more. So maybe the spending does go up a little bit in the beginning of retirement, but later in retirement years, that spending really does start to dwindle down because that discretionary spending is just not there. People aren't, going out as often, not doing as many recreational activities. But one thing that does go up over time is the healthcare cost. And so things like long-term care is becoming much, much more commonplace as people's life expectancy continues. Many more people will find themselves in long-term care for some duration. It could be 7 years in a nursing home. It could be 3 months with in-home nursing. That could be a lot of things. So again, having health savings accounts in place, making sure that you have proper savings just in general for retirement, for your needs, for your goals, and really a spending plan, an idea of what your expenditures would look like realistically in retirement is really, really important. A lot of times people forget about how big of a cost that can be. And I don't think I need to tell the horror stories for you to understand that people can get towards the end of life and then all of a sudden need some serious intensive care in a professional facility, and it's very costly, and it can very quickly drain the resources that they spent a long time trying to accumulate. And now people are left in a really tough situation where they either have no inheritance to pass on that was really important to them, or worse yet, they're really having to liquidate all of their assets and turn over every stone just to kind of take care of those last few expenses. So certainly not a situation anybody wants to be in, and something that you want to make sure you properly plan for. Third thing, as far as biggest retirement mistakes, is I would say just not really having a distribution strategy, because we all understand, you got to save money for retirement, put money in the 401k, put it in the IRA. So you build up this huge nest egg, but then you retire and you've got Social Security, maybe a pension, maybe some other sources of income, but you're going to have to be pulling from that nest egg as well to pay for the things that you want to pay for. That was the whole point of it. But which assets to sell? When do we withdraw? From which accounts do we withdraw? How much do I take each year? These are really important questions, and these can be a huge difference in the rate of success that people have. What about when the market changes? What if we go through a recession? How should that change how you're withdrawing, how much you're withdrawing, where you're withdrawing from? And then just making sure that your withdrawals is sustainable. Nobody wants to build up a nest egg of several $100,000 and then all of a sudden they're 82 and it's gone because they were spending out too much. Or conversely, I guess this is not as bad, but still to the point where they had money and they had dreams and goals and things they wanted to do, but they just didn't do it because they were worried that they couldn't pull too much, or they had to just leave it alone. And so there's a middle road for sure, and understanding the right way, sustainable way to withdraw from your nest egg in retirement and not risk spending out the entire capital, the principal amount. Okay, next question. This is a really good one. I'm going to only take the first half of the question because the question was about high yield dividend stocks and index funds. And for sake of time, I'm just going to try to tackle the high yield dividend portion of it. So first of all, what are high yield dividend stocks? Well, they are stocks that pay out a significant portion of their revenues directly to their shareholders. So some examples would be Exxon, AT&T, Altria, the tobacco company. These are companies that a significant amount of the money that comes in they will flow right back out to their stockholders in the form of dividends. So when you own a stock, you are part owner in a business. And some stocks, not all, choose to pay dividends. And it's earnings that you're receiving from the company, your proportion, your share, based on their growth. So some of the stocks that pay out a very high percentage of their revenue to shareholders, we call them high yield dividend stocks, because the yield is expressed as a percentage of the stock price. So for instance, what am I talking about here? So let's say you buy a $100 share of ABC stock, and it says that it's currently paying a 2% dividend. What that means is 2% of that $100 is $2 a share. It pays out $2 a share per year to you. So if you own this stock, what they're telling you is, we're going to pay you $2 every year just for being an owner. You think, great, that's wonderful. Sign me up. Why doesn't everybody do this? Well, it's more complicated than that. The dividend amount will stay the same regardless of the share price. So sometimes people get confused about that. They're like, well, what if the stock price goes up or down? Does that change how much they're paying out in dividend? No, the stock price doesn't change that. So for instance, if it's $2 a share and the stock price goes from 100 down to 80, well, the only thing that's going to change is now the yield will show 2.5%. Because if you buy it now at 80, 2.5% of that price is coming to you every year in the form of a dividend. Now, the thing is, companies can change the dividend amount at any time. So sometimes people are like, oh, great, it pays a dividend, guaranteed. Well, it's guaranteed as long as the company says they're going to pay it, but they can change their mind. There's nothing that says they have to pay a dividend, and some stocks don't. Some stocks are called dividend aristocrats because they have a long-term history of continually raising their dividend and not cutting it. So you find all types, but dividends are usually paid out on a quarterly basis. So if it's $2 a year per share, then it comes out to 50 cents a quarter, and you get the idea. So every so often, as you have these dividend-paying stocks, you're getting these checks, and that can be great depending on what the goal of your investing is. And so really what you want to ask yourself when it comes to investing in high-yield dividend stocks is, why? Why are we wanting to invest in these? Is it because I want income? Is it because I'm trying to get the best growth, outperformance? So we have to understand what the dividend is and that they are taxable. So if you don't have these dividend stocks in a qualified retirement account, if you just have a regular old brokerage account, when you get dividends, you're going to get a form at the end of the year, and you're going to have to pay taxes on that most likely. What really matters, though, is the overall growth. And really, what you want to do is not allow the dividend to distract you from the overall picture. So sometimes this happens. For instance, some of those stocks that I mentioned, they're paying 5% plus as a dividend. So you think, wow, I buy this stock, it's going to pay me 5%, 6%, 7% every year. I mean, that's great, right? Even if it goes nowhere, I'm still getting a strong return. And that would be true if the price stays stagnant, if the price stays where it is, but it may not. So if the dividend is 8% and the stock dropped 5%, well, then your actual return, your total return was only 3%. So you want to look at the total return, because that's what really matters at the end of the day. And also keep in mind that there is usually a reason for a higher dividend. Stocks that pay out higher dividends may not always be a good sign. It may actually be a sign of perhaps some financial weakness or a reluctance on the part of the company to want to invest back in themselves. There's other stocks that don't pay dividends. We usually call them growth stocks because their mindset is, no, we're not paying out any revenue to our shareholders. We're going to reinvest it in our company because we believe we can get a better return by reinvesting in ourselves. So there's this whole dividend-paying stocks versus growth stocks, and this is probably a better conversation for a whole episode. But reinvesting the dividends is really key for long-term performance. So if your goal with investing is long-term growth and you're looking at dividend stocks, then I would highly encourage you to reinvest the dividends, because that is going to make a huge difference to your overall return. If you're investing in dividend-paying stocks and every time you get a dividend, you're just setting aside in cash or putting that money to something else and not reinvesting it, you're probably not going to do better than alternative stocks that don't pay dividends. Let me put it that way. most likely. And the data, we have a lot of data on this. Dividend-paying stocks, they have, over the long term, done better than growth type of stocks, but it's not necessarily the high-yield dividend-paying stocks. We're talking more dividend stocks in general. So when would high-yield dividend stocks be appropriate? Well, number one, if you're looking for income. So if you're in a stage of life, especially in retirement, where you've got a nest egg of money and you're wanting to withdraw from it on a regular basis, well, that can be a smart way to do it because the dividends are going to come out on a regular basis and you can structure your portfolio such that, those dividends are helping to meet your income needs. So that can be something good. Could still also be good for performance. Like I just said, there's a lot of data that shows that dividend-paying stocks, you usually categorize them in value stocks, is another term that dividend stocks usually get lumped in with. They have done better than growth stocks, the ones that don't pay a dividend, over the long term. And another benefit is that they're usually less volatile, meaning in market ups and downs and market turbulence, they usually don't fluctuate and swing in price as much as, more cutting edge technology, growth style stocks may. So, and by the way, if you're going to invest in high yield dividend stocks, I would encourage you to invest via a fund instead of trying to pick individual stocks and be like, ooh, AT&T or Exxon looks good. I'm going to pick that one up. Instead, by having a fund, number one, you're going to be diversified. And it's very incredibly hard to pick winning stocks. The vast majority of people who try to pick winning stocks don't do it successfully. So you pick a fund, you're going to have dozens, if not hundreds of dividend-paying stocks. You're going to diversify, lower your risk, and I would really encourage you to go that route. So a lot more we could say on the dividend-paying stocks, but I hope that makes sense. I hope that explains a little bit about what dividend-paying stocks are and how they can help you and when they're appropriate. Okay, next question. How much house can I afford? This is a question I've gotten several times here recently. And what people usually mean by this question is, what should my budget be? I'm looking to buy a house. What's kind of the line in the sand I should be looking at? And that is a different question entirely because what you can afford versus what your budget should be could be two very different numbers. I think a good question, the better question to ask yourself is not what could I afford or what am I able to purchase, but rather what's the cheapest house that will meet my needs both now and for the foreseeable future. So just because you can afford a $500,000 house, and that would be the upper limit of your range, doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go out and start looking at houses in that price range. Because if a house at $300,000 is more than enough for your needs, and there's no foreseeable events in the future that's going to change that, then that's great. Because then you're going to free up so much of your budget for other things, or be able to take a shorter term loan and pay that house off even quicker than you might have been able to a more expensive house. So here's the basic rule of thumb with affordability. It's your home payment, that's including your principal and interest, taxes, insurance, mortgage insurance if that applies, HOA fees, all of that lumped together. Your house payment should be no more than 28% of your gross monthly pay. Also, your total debt, so both your house payment plus any other debts, that shouldn't be more than 36% of your gross monthly pay. If you can stay within those ranges, that's really good. And I think those numbers hold true for the majority of cases. So for instance, let's give an example. Let's say your monthly gross income is $6,000. Multiply that times 28%. That's $1,680 a month. That's how much you should budget to pay for your house payment. Taxes, insurance, principal and interest, mortgage interest, HOA, all of that bundled together, $1,680 would be the budget. Then from there, as you're looking at homes, there's lots of mortgage calculators that are out there that allow you to put in the numbers. Zillow's got one that's built into their platform, and there's a lot of free ones out there. You'll be able to estimate what your payments would be with taxes, insurance, and all of that included, because that's going to depend on your area. It's not uniform across the country. Other factors that are going to change this too, though, keep in mind, Your affordability can depend a lot on how much you're going to put on down payment. If you put 20% down, there's no mortgage insurance, and your payment is going to be lower because it's not as big of a loan. But if you go with a 0% down loan, well, it's going to be easier to get in the door, but that means a bigger payment. Interest rate factors into that. Right now they're very low, and that's great, and that's very helpful. Your term, that can be a big one. I mean, a 15-year term versus a 30-year term, that's huge because paying your loan off in 15 years means you have to pay a much bigger monthly payment. So when you consider all these extra factors, the home affordability, that could be a really wide range. So somebody with $6,000 a month, maybe in their situation, they could afford a home that's $400,000 and still stay in those guardrails, that 28%. While somebody else with the same income, $6,000 a month, maybe they could only afford a house of $200,000 because of all those other factors in their situation. So it's going to depend on a lot of those. Now, keep in mind, we also want to look at total debt. So to give another example, let's say somebody has a gross income of $10,000 a month. Well, they don't want their loan payments to be more than 36% of that. So 36% of $10,000, $3,600. That means, let's say they have 2 car loans. Maybe they have a couple student loans. And so their monthly payments on all those is already $1,500. Well, that means they would only have $2,100 of room for their housing payment to stay under that 36% threshold. So even though $2,100 a month is below 28% of their gross income and it meets that test, you want to make sure that you don't add up all your debt payments to be over 36% of your total gross income. And if you'll stay within those limits, that'll really help you to not overextend yourself. Okay, let's talk about the hot topic of the day. I saved the best for last. I got several folks asking me about crypto, which is very broad in and of itself. So, nowadays, and so I do enjoy talking about it, and it's something that I know is on a lot of people's minds, so I knew I had to get to that in this episode. The crypto investment trend is ubiquitous. You see it everywhere. Maybe you saw Staples Center there in Los Angeles is now going to be renamed Crypto.com Arena. I mean, you've got your Uber driver, your barber. Everybody's giving you their cryptocurrency tips, and they're showing you on their app. They're showing you their live portfolio, which they check roughly 47 times a day. I mean, it's everywhere. And the level of hype and attention really should give a wise investor pause about this area. And the question we ask ourselves is, are we witnessing the early stages of something that's going to entirely upend our financial system? Is this something that is no more than the latest version of the tech bubble? Is this just way overinflated? Is this like the Dutch tulip mania? Which, if you're not familiar with that one, look it up. It's very interesting. So is it a big bubble? Maybe there are some aspects of crypto that have enormous potential, like blockchain or tokens and tokenization and decentralized payments. And maybe there's other aspects that are just going to fade out over time, and those will be the bubble. So there's going to be some things that remain and some things that are a bubble, like maybe cryptocurrencies that are named after popular dogs featured in internet memes. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. The truth is, no one knows. I don't know. You don't know. We don't know the future. So caution and discernment are called for. So when you're investing in things like stocks or bonds or real estate, well, we have a mountain of data and history that help us make reasonable assumptions and trade-offs on the risk versus reward. But with crypto, we don't. It's basically impossible to properly value something like Bitcoin. How valuable is it really? Hard to say. Now, I'm definitely not here to tell you, hey, you should invest in Bitcoin or invest in Ethereum, or even that you should be investing in crypto at all. So I'm sorry if you were hoping to get an actionable investing tip. That's not what this is about. But what I am here to do is offer some helpful parameters on investing. So whatever the new trend, the new technology, the new asset that it happens to be, let me offer you some helpful guardrails for navigating that. All right. So in this instance, it just happens to be crypto. First of all, you have to ask yourself the question, why am I investing in X? Why? Is it for fun? Is it I believe this is how I'm going to fund my retirement one day. Are you trying to save up money for a house purchase? Are you trying to become a millionaire in the next 5 months? I mean, the answer to that question really tells you a lot about your mindset and the reasons for why you should or shouldn't be in it in the first place, okay? So let me offer some guardrails. Let me offer some basic parameters that I would suggest to anybody when it comes to investing in cryptocurrency. Number one, don't invest any money that you cannot afford to lose. Rule number one, because we do not know how this is going to shake out, and we've seen a lot of investments that would on the surface have seemed to be more stable and long-lasting collapse. So to think that we're immune or that there's no chance of losing it all, that's foolish, okay? So your retirement funds, your house savings, your emergency fund, that's not money that you should be investing in crypto because you can't afford to lose that money. Now, if you believe in the potential and you believe that you really need to be in on this new asset class, then I would say do not invest any more than 5% of your overall portfolio. And that would be a good rule of thumb for any type of speculative asset, something that has the ability to rise very quickly and rapidly, but also go to zero very quickly. And that's what crypto is. It's a speculative asset at this point. Number three, third guardrail, do your homework, understand what it is that you are investing in and why you believe it has potential. All right? It's amazing to me that there's so many people that are investing in these coins and in these tokens and and they don't even really know what it is. They don't know what it does. There's some very real world possible application for blockchain and for tokens and for decentralizing currency. I get all of that. All right. I'm not the crypto expert, but I get the possibility. I get that there's potential there. But there's also a lot of hype and a lot of frenzy. There's a lot of examples of people running into something because they think a bigger idiot is going to come in after them and buy their thing for more than they did. So as long as they get in early enough, it doesn't matter if that thing has value or not, as long as I can turn a quick buck. That's dangerous. That's something you want to be extremely, extremely careful about. Fourth guardrail, find ways to diversify even if it's a new space. All right, so we don't know how this is going to shake out. Remember back in the 90s and the internet came along and all the tech stocks and .com companies were going crazy and people were wondering who's going to dominate the internet? Who's it going to be? Is it going to be AOL? Is it going to be Yahoo? Well, it turned out to be a company that no one had heard of, Google, right? So we don't know how this cryptocurrency is going to shake out. We don't know if there's going to be a few winners, no winners. They're all winners. We don't know. So diversification would be smart. And instead of just picking one and trying to ride or die with it, making sure that you diversify is always a good idea. Fifth guardrail, recognize how easily greed and the fear of missing out, FOMO, can influence your decisions. Here's the thing, folks. It's really, I get it, okay? Because I feel it. I'm not immune to what you've experienced as well. You hear these stories, you see these people that jumped in on a coin, that jumped in on an asset way back when, and they have just made a killing. They have gotten extraordinarily wealthy in a very short amount of time, and we look at that and say, why couldn't that be me? But remember that for every winner that you're seeing, you're not seeing the 10 losers. You're not seeing all the stories of people that jumped in at the wrong time, that bought at the high end and then sold when it was low. Really, really be careful and make sure that your greed and your fear of missing out is not trumping your ability to make reasonable decisions and logical decisions. Make sure with investing, as we've talked about before, that you don't lead with emotion. Really, really important. Guardrail number, what is this? 6, 7. Stay open-minded, but not so open-minded that your brain falls out. I've heard that a lot of different times, but it definitely applies to investing. I stay open-minded. I certainly, as I've said before, I don't know how this will end. Nobody does. We don't want to make a snap judgment either for or against cryptocurrency and then say, I'm just going to live with that opinion, and I'm not going to let any new information change my mind. No, we should be open-minded and be willing to adapt and learn as new information comes along, but don't be so gullible and open-minded that you fall for anything. And then lastly here, last guardrail, make sure that you invest your serious long-term money in assets that have a very high likelihood of growing in value over time. Stocks, bonds, real estate, things that have been proven, time-tested, that have a much, much higher likelihood of appreciating in value over time. Here's the thing, folks. If you're trying to save money for your retirement in 30 years and 15 years, should you have a considerable amount of money in something that really could go one of two very, very different directions? Is that a smart decision? I would say no. Okay. Am I saying that you cannot invest in crypto, that's always wrong, or that's always a foolish decision? No, I'm not. I'm just saying you want to be careful. Make sure that you set up guardrails for yourself so that you don't end up looking back in hindsight and saying, man, I wish I hadn't been so reckless. Okay, well, that was a lot. That was probably a longer episode than I was anticipating it being. But, man, I hope you found it helpful. I enjoyed going through those questions, thinking through my answers, and just explaining some of my thoughts on those. Man, I hope you have a great Thanksgiving and enjoy time with friends, with family, and of course, just take some time to be thankful for just what a wonderful and amazing life God has blessed us with, and we truly do have so much to be thankful for. And as always, if you ever need to get a hold of me and want to have a conversation, go to my website, nateskelly.com. There's a schedule a call button there if you want to talk to me and just kind of shoot some questions my way. I'd be happy to have that conversation with you. Okay, well, thanks for listening to this episode, and I will see you on the next one.